Ajam nirvikalpam nirakaramekam niranandamanandam advaita purnam param nirgunam nirvishesham niriham parabrahma rupam ganesham bhajema. Friends, at the outside, while I thank all those who have very generously contributed to the collective Guru Purnima Guru Dakshina, 100% of which shall be offered to all our Gurus, I request you to update the details on the Google Forms if not yet done. Team Param Vedanta extends a warm welcome to one and all for today's 109th session of Bhagavad Gita verse by verse. Continuing our study of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14, Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, verses 18 to 22 shall be explained by our team of Param Vedanta teachers, Sri Amitabha Saha Roy, Dr. Sanjay Mehrotra, Srimati Lakshmi, Sri Ullas, under the guidance of our Dr. Timmappa Hegde Sir, who will give us an introduction to the day's topic, as well as help us understand the key insights or important aspects of the verses. We shall be concluding with chanting of today's verses by young Aruni Shankar. But first, Dr. Rupa Suresh shall give us a recap of the previous session. Over to Dr. Rupa Suresh, Madam.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Let us recap the verses that we've dealt with in the last class. Chapter 14, verses 13 to 17. As we have learned from the last class, in chapter 14 of Bhagavad Gita, we are learning about Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga. In these summary verses from 13 to 17, we look at specific aspects of the analysis of three gunas with respect to, firstly, the lingam, the indication of the dominant guna, secondly, gati, that is the path of the jivatma after death, and thirdly, the phalam, the result of these gunas in this life itself. Next slide, sir. In verse 13, when all the gyanendriyas are dull, it leads to the absence of sattva. When all the karmendriyas are also dull, it leads to the absence of rajas. Such an individual is overpowered by tamoguna and he does not do anything. The result of which is negligence, carelessness, and laziness. Mentally, there is delusion and conflict leading to procrastination. These indicators can help judge oneself and choose appropriate sadhana to improve the proportion of gunas in each individual. Next slide, sir. In verses 14 and 15, we learn about gati. That is, if a person has sattva gati, he is going to attain higher lokas. Whereas if a person has rajas gati, he is going to go back and have rebirth in the manusha loka. Whereas if a person has tamas gati, predominantly he is going to be born back in the lower lokas. Next slide, sir. Now, going through each one of this, when a person has Satva Guna predominance, that is here we are talking about Ajnani Ishvara Upasaka. He attains higher lokas, travels vertically upwards like the Bhuvar, Suvar, Mahar, Jana, Tapa and Satyalokas, where there is no accumulation of Papam or Punyam. He can only exhaust his karmas. Next slide, sir. When a person has Rajoguna predominance, he travels horizontally. He is reborn in Bhuloka to exhaust his karmas, accumulates more punyam and papam. Even if born in the form of lower birth like animals and plants, he will have no free will and buddhi is not evolved. When a person has Tamoguna predominance, he travels vertically downwards to lower lokas, to Athala, Vithala, Suthala, Rasathala, Mahathala, Talathala, and Pathala. The next slide talks about verses 16 and 17, where the benefits of the three gunas are discussed as seen in one's life. If a person undertakes good activity, it leads to a life of peace and harmony. If he undertakes tremendous activities, it leads to a life without peace and harmony. And if he has no activity, the advantage of human life is lost. The next slide is the last verse, also highlights the phalam or benefits. Next slide, sir. Jnana is born of Satva Guna, where the Jnanendriyas are active, resulting in an increased absorbing and learning capacity. Action is born out of Rajoguna, where the Karmendriyas are active, resulting in greed, ambition, planning, activity, and scheming. Ajnana is born out of Tamoguna, where Karmendriyas and the Gyanendriyas are inactive, resulting in oversight, forgetfulness, delusion, and increased ignorance. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rupa. That was a very clear summary with excellent slides. And in a very brief presentation, we had an idea of all the verses we studied in the last class. Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Pariyantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. In today's class, I wanted to introduce to you the Vyadha Gita. The Vyadha Gita comes from the Mahabharata. Vyadha means hunter, but here it actually means the butcher. A holy song, just like the Gita, but a holy song coming from a butcher. To recap, because we are studying the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is the longest epic or the longest poem ever, universally, with more than 100,000 verses. It is divided into 18 sections of parvas. And each of these parvas have got many chapters, some of them more than 100 chapters. Each parva would have some of them will have about hundreds of chapters, hundreds. The longest of them is the Aranyaka Parva. The Aranyaka Parva means that phase of 12 years when the Pandavas were wandering in the forest. And there Vyasacharya gives a nice description of the wonderful experiences that Yudhishthira and his brothers have while they're going out in the forest. We come to a stage in the Markandeya, where you will know Markandeya is that person who's a Chiranjeevi, and in their wanderings in the forest, here comes Markandeya. And Markandeya tells us a story which is very fascinating. And in that, among the stories comes this Vyadha Gita. The Bhagavad Gita comes in the next chapter, which is called not the next chapter, a few chapters later, called the Bhishma Parva. Now, about Markandeya. We know about Markandeya. Markandeya, when he was born, his parents knew that he's going to live only up to the age of 16, but he was an ardent Shiva Bhakta. And the story goes that when Yama called him at his due date, he said, let me finish my prayers that I have set off to do. But Yamadharmaraja never waits. He put the noose around him, but unfortunately the noose included the Shiva Linga also, because he was so closely attached to Shiva Linga. The noose fell not only on Markandeya, it fell on the Shiva Linga. And of course, Lord Shiva manifested, and that was when Markandeya won over death. When he wins over death, what happens? He now becomes a Chiranjeevi. He is there for all time. And part of his stories describe what really happens at the time of Pralaya, how the whole creation has come to an end and how the whole creation is born again. And among the stories, this is the story of the Vyadha Gita. There was a particular well-learned Brahmana who was sitting under a tree doing his morning meditation when a certain bird dropping fell on him, and it made him very angry. The angry Brahmana looked at that crane, that bird, and his glare was so powerful, the bird was reduced to ashes. Of course, he felt remorseful, but he never knew he had such powers. Having finished his prayers, he set off looking for food. He went to a place where he was begging, and there was a lady who asked him to wait. I will get you some food. But meanwhile, her husband came, and being a very devoted wife, it was her duties to serve her husband first. And the Brahmana, was kept waiting. He was kept waiting for a few minutes, and he got very irritated, very angry. And then the dialogue goes, that you have slighted me, you have not given me my due importance. Then she explained that, it was her duty to serve her husband, but she also warned him, don't be so angry. I know that because of your anger, you have destroyed a bird. Suddenly he realized that this is a lady who knew something extraordinary, and because of her devotion to her husband alone, she had developed special powers. And then she advises him to go to a neighboring town called Mithala and to meet a certain Vyadha. The Vyadha in Sanskrit means a hunter, and this Brahmana was expecting to meet a certain Kshatriya, and to his disappointment, he found that the Vyadha was none other than a butcher. A big dialogue happens. There are many important discussions that happen as part of the Vyadha Gita, where the Vyadha is none other than a butcher, is giving deep spiritual instructions very similar to the Bhagavad Gita. There are so many verses. The Vyadha Gita precedes the Bhagavad Gita, and some of these verses, which we are very familiar with at some other stage, I will tell you what are those verses we have already studied in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Especially in the Sthita Prajna portion, these verses come from none other than the Vyadha. Of importance for today's class is the three gunas and the Gunateetha are discussed by Vyadha in the Vyadha Gita. Today's topic of the three gunas is there is a shift. You will see from verses 18 onwards or verses 19 onwards, there is a shift from Gunatraya to Gunateetha. And this time I thought I would like to touch on what Swamiji repeatedly talks about, two fundamental laws of Vedanta. I know I have said this many times, but because it is so important, let us remember what are these two fundamental laws. The first fundamental law relates to Athma-Ahamkara viveka or drishya viveka, where this is an exercise that we need to tell ourselves, I am someone other than whatever I experience. I can experience my body and mind, and therefore I am not my body and mind. And this has to become a nishta, and this is the first fundamental principle of Vedanta, which we studied in the 13th chapter. In the verses today, we will study about the second fundamental law that relates to attributes or gunas. All attributes that I experience belong to the experienced objects. It may be in the world outside or within my body and mind. I as Atma am Nirguna. If this understanding happens, this understanding itself can be transformative. Now, from the Tattva Bodha days, we have to understand this fundamental viveka. This is one of the primary qualifications a student of Vedanta has, what is called viveka. The first viveka or discrimination is Atma-Anatma viveka. Whatever I experience is Anatma, I am Atma. The same thing has come in the 13th chapter as Kshetrajna, the knower of the field, and Kshetram, the objects that I experience. There is a special text called Drishya Viveka. Drik means the seer, Drishyam means the objects that I see. In the 13th chapter, this came as Purusha and Prakriti Viveka, which is coming in this chapter as Gunatraya and Gunateetha. How do I move from the three gunas to the one who is Nirguna? For this, I have to do this exercise again and again. I am someone other than whatever I experience. The real me is someone other than my body. I am not my body. I am not my mind. Then who am I? I am the witness of my body and mind. I function through this body and mind. The body and mind is only an instrument. And because I am of a higher order of reality, and this is what gives us true liberation and understanding, that whatever happens to my body and mind can affect the way I interact in the world, but it cannot really affect me because I am of a higher order of reality. Anchor on the Mahavakya. I am Atma and I am Nirguna. As Nirguna, I have no attributes. I have no attributes in time. That means I have been there from the very beginning. If there is a beginning, I will continue to be there till the very end if there is an end. So as far as my age is concerned, I am also a Chiranjeevi, like Markandeya. I am Nityaha. I have been there. I will continue to be there. I means as Atma. As Atma, as body mind, I am limited. I am located here. But as Atma, I have no location whatsoever. I cannot even say I'm all-pervading. All-pervading refers to space. In fact, space is within me. And I seem to relate to this body as me, but now I know that I'm not limited to this body. And the aging of the body, the sickness of the body, or the dropping of the body cannot really affect me. And this can give us real liberation. Now, why do we suffer from samsara? Primarily because we do not have Atma, Anatma, viveka. So what is the aim of all these classes? We have to constantly train our mind to claim that I am the Atma. The body-mind is incidental and instrument for purposes of transaction. The body-mind is programmed, has a very clear role to play. It is like a director who has given me a script, who's given me a costume. And this world is a stage. The more I realize that the world is a stage and I have a very clear instructions from the director, I cannot go beyond my script. I play my script 100%, but all the time remembering I am the Atma, and this is a role play that I have to do as long as this role has been assigned to me. Coming back to this particular chapter, which is the Gunatraya to Gunateetha. As I said, we have come to a transitional phase. There we make the real claim that I am the Atma, which is Gunateetha, which is different from the body-mind, which has got all the three gunas. I also know, as long as I claim the body-mind, which is the Ahamkara, I cannot escape from the gunas. I am bound by them. So what do I have to do? I have to disidentify and identify with the Atma. Now, this is exactly like a pole vaulter who uses the pole to be able to go beyond. With this background, we will come to today's class. There is one more slide which I have to touch on. And that is, when we enter into Vyavahara, we tend to forget this. How do we remember? Remember both these pictures of Lord Shiva. Both in the Nataraja and in the Dakshinamurti, you will see the right leg of the Lord is standing on Apasmara. Apasmara is forgetfulness of my spiritual knowledge. So when I enter into this world, I should always remember who I am. I am someone other. This whole creation is the dance of the Creator. And when I am dancing my roles, let me be like Nataraja, anchored in my real self, never forgetting my true nature. The opening verse today will be explained to us by Amitabha Saha. Amitabha, please.
Urdhvam gachanti sattvasthaha madhye tishtanti rajasaha jaghanya guna vritti Stistaha adho gachanti tamasaha. In verse 14.18, Lord Krishna talks about the topic of Gatihi. Gatihi means travel after death. What happens after death to people who are Satva Guna Pradhana, Rajo Guna Pradhana, and Tamo Guna Pradhana? This is the topic of discussion in this sloka. So let's start with Satva Guna Pradhana person. A Satva Guna Pradhana person goes to a higher loka after death. There are 6 higher lokas: Bhuvaha, Suvaha, Maha, Tanaha, Tapaha, and Satyam. He or she will go to any one of these higher lokas. Totally, it is believed that there are 14 lokas, including 6 higher lokas, 7 lower lokas, and then, of course, our own earth. Now, let us consider what happens to Rajasic people after death. They remain in Manushya Loka only, or Bhuloka, and they stagnate. So, on the positive side, they don't go down further, but on the flip side, they don't go up either. Now, let's consider what happens to the Tamoguna Pradhana person. The Tamoguna is the inferior most guna. Those who lead a tamasic way of life go towards Adhogati. Now that we have seen how a person travels after death depending on their guna, we need to understand one very important point. Although we talk about higher and lower lokas, these are not meant to be higher or lower in terms of time and space. It's not as if a higher loka is somewhere up there among the clouds. Higher means it's higher in terms of quality, not in terms of spatial location. To understand this concept better, it is helpful to compare with the example of dream world and waking world. Let's say in the dream world, we see an elephant. Now, when we wake up, is there a way to touch the elephant? No. There's no time and space corridor that can help us reach from the dream world to the waking world. Similarly, the concept of higher and lower loka is not a time and space concept, but it is higher or lower in terms of quality. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Amitabh, for this nice explanation, which talk of in one verse itself about what happens when you give importance to the various gunas in day-to-day life. That is why we need to give the relative importance, because all the time remembering that if I get too involved, I will get into samsara. If I am predominantly sattva, it brings about spiritual progress. If I'm predominantly rajasic, I get stuck as far as spiritual growth. There is no progress. And if I engage in tamasic activities, that is the lowest guna, and that can cause a spiritual downfall. The next verse, which is verse 19, will be explained by me. Nanyam gunebhya kartaram yada drashtanu pashyati gunebhyascha param veti madbhavam so adhigacchati. Very important verse, because this is a transitional verse. Let us get the word meaning of each word in this verse. Yada, when, drashta anupashyati, when the seer understands, kartaram, the doer, na anyam gunebhya, is someone other than the gunas, cha veti, and knows what? The self, param gunebhya, that which is beyond the gunas, sa adhigacchati, such a person attains madbhavam, my nature. I will go slow. There will be a process of a lot of repetitions, but be patient, because this is an important verse. Yada, drashta. See, there are two kinds of seers in all of us. One is the limited seer, the pramata. When I wake up and my body mind becomes awake, I become a limited experiencer, and my experience is limited to whatever I can see is this room, and that we can call as the drashta. when the drashta sees or understands, anupashyati. Anupashyati is a very key important word. Anupashyati means to see again or to reflect. That means when I pariksha lokan, that means when I have examined the world with the help of Guru and Shastra, suddenly on a certain time, there is a spota. There is an inner explosion and I get a deeper understanding. And this is the second impression or a deeper understanding. The important word is anupashyati. Anupashyati can be taken as realization. What is the realization that I get? This realization is about the kartaram, the one who is doing the actions. Ask yourself, who is the one who is doing the actions? We have discussed this before. Can my body do any actions? The body by itself is inert. It cannot do any actions. Can my mind? The mind is also a subtle body. It is only an instrument. So my body cannot do, my mind cannot do. My Atma, which is all pervading, and because of its infinite nature, does not move and cannot do. Therefore, who is the one who's been doing all these actions? A new entity is born whenever I wake up and use this body-mind. That means the universal consciousness functioning through this body-mind, a new entity is gone, and that is called the Ahamkara. The Ahamkara is the doer. That means yada drashta anupashyati, about when I realize who is this kartaram, who is this ego. I suddenly realize, my God, all my life I have been spent proving to others that I am a somebody, when I know I don't have to prove anything to anybody because I am already that. When you get that kind of a realization, that when you realize that I am someone beyond this limited body-mind, when you realize you are that Gunateetha, you are that consciousness who knows about all these activities, then what is your understanding? Na anyam. That means I am someone other than the gunas. Cha veti. Veti is another very important word. Adi Shankara and Swamiji have given a lot of importance to both drashta and veti. Veti is like anupashyati, a person who understands. Understands what is param, what is the highest, is something gunebhya, is something which is beyond the gunas, which is Gunateetha. That means when I realize that all along I've been functioning as the ego, suddenly I realize I'm not that limited body-mind complex. I am the witnessing consciousness who is beyond the gunas. Then what happens? Adhigacchati. You reach what? Madbhavam. Such a person will reach that highest state which is beyond all the gunas. I will read this because this is the literal translation of this verse, and I hope you will be able to understand. When the seer, that means the limited seer, Pramata, understands anupashyati, the doer, to be none other than the gunas. That means all along I have been functioning through my lower self, and knows, suddenly now realizes his higher self, which is beyond the gunas. He attains to my nature, which is none other than consciousness. To repeat, as body-mind, we can never escape from the three gunas. And each of these gunas, whether it is rajas, tamas, and sattva, have its own problems. And when there is a problem, then what do? I will do sort of activities to avoid what I do not like. And therefore, I become the karta. How does one become a Gunateetha? You will realize Gunateetha is not a process of becoming. Because I'm so involved in day-to-day activities, I have never taken a pause. I have never taken a break. It is when I take a break and I look at myself, I realize I am someone other than these gunas. And then what happens? The compromise answer is There is no becoming a Gunateetha, but I shift my identification from Ahamkara to Atma. So the one who discovers the Sakshi Tattvam attains Brahman. So what do I have to do? Instead of saying I am the body with Sakshi, I must train myself to say I am the Sakshi with an incidental body-mind complex. For the sake of transactions, it is okay to identify with the body-mind, but all the time realizing, like Sri Dakshinamurti or Nataraja, keeping one foot, remembering the teaching all the time. There is a little more elaboration of the same verse in the next verse, which will be explained to us by Dr. Sanjay Mehrotra. Dr. Sanjay, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. As Dr. Hegde explained, that we are all governed by our three gunas, and although there may be a different manifestations of these gunas in a jiva, which is what we are, but what Krishna is trying to teach is that these three gunas are governing our life from day one we are born. And unless we evolve ourselves to go beyond these three gunas, we will not be a samatvi, we will not be a yogi, we will not attain what is required to be attained. And then once you are beyond the gunas, you become what Krishna is. So in the next verse, he is describing the phala of understanding this process. He says, Gunan etan atitya trina dehi dehe samudbhavan janma mrityu jara dukkhai vimuktaha amritam ashnute. Coming to the meaning, next slide, sir. Atitya is an important word, and which means having gone beyond, something where you have moved from that. Atitya. Etan trin gunan. These three gunas. Trin is three, gunan is gunas. Etan from here. These three gunas. Deha samudbhavan, which are the cause of the rebirth. Because if you are not even going beyond sattva, you may have a lot of sattva. You may attain a higher position after death, which is called as a higher loka, which was described in the recaps also and in the previous verses. That person, a person, dehi vimuktaha. Vimuktaha means to become free from janma, mrityu, jara, dukkha. Janma is being born, mrityu is death, jara is old age, and dukkha. And he attains ashnute, attains amritam, immortality. What it means is, having gone beyond these three gunas, which are the cause of rebirth, a person becomes free from birth, death, old age, and sorrow, and attains immortality. Next slide, please, sir. So here, Krishna is explaining how once a jiva obtains this knowledge. Now, the important thing is that you have to have that jnana. You have to obtain that knowledge. What happens? What is the phalam of that? Of course, phalam is still required to be known, although we may not be attached to that phalam, but it's still required to be known. A jiva now learns to disidentify from these three gunas, which here not represents just the gunas, but the anatma, the entire anatma, which are the three sharirams, which we have known, sthula, sukshma, and karna shariram, and the five koshas, which is the annamaya, the pranamaya, manomaya, vijnanamaya, and anandamaya kosha. The kosha also, you go beyond everything. You have no connection with anatma. This body disidentification is established, and he understands his body is a temporary abode, and this state is called as atitya. The gunas belong to the physical body, deha samudbhava, from which the body is produced. The prakriti, the nature, your existence, which is brought from the causal state, from the karana shariram state, is subject to these gunas. Once you understand, you go beyond, when you get this jnana, the phalam is that you are beyond this the cycle of birth and death. Next slide, please. So what happens then? The person identifies with, disidentifies with this body, and he becomes a vimukta, free from all problems of the body. And what is the result of the knowledge? Amritam ashnute. He obtains amritam, immortality. He becomes free from janma, mrityu, jara, which I have told already, and of course, old age and suffering. So your concerns about this life, because the human life is always concerned about disease and this body, because as we become more and more old and we don't have this understanding, we become more and more body conscious. This joint, that joint, this pain, diabetes, hypertension will all become your primary aim of life. What Krishna is teaching, that once you understand that you are not your body, you are the abode, your real self is that which has got no attributes at all, that is Brahman or Atman itself, then you become beyond the sufferings of the body. He attains immortality. His identification shifts from immortal body to immortal Atma, and this is called as Jivan Mukti. This is the understanding from this verse. Hari Om Sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjay. That was a very clear explanation of a very important verse. As I can highlight, this is Vedantic wisdom. And this is the way to true freedom. And if a person does not attain to this, then we have that Deha Samudbhavan, Punarapi Jananam, Punarapi Maranam. All of us who are now committed to our teacher and the Shastras know that if we have to go beyond the cycle, we have to go beyond these three gunas. We have to go beyond Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Dukkham. And it is possible simply by disidentifying from the body-mind complex and identifying with the Atma. The next verse, verse 21, will be explained to us by Lakshmi. Lakshmi, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Kairlingai Strim Gunaneetan Atito Bhavati Prabho Kimachara Katam Chaitan Trin Gunanati Vartate. Meaning of the verse: O Lord, what are the characteristics of a person who is beyond these three gunas appear? What is his conduct and how does he go beyond these three gunas? In this verse, Arjuna wants to know more about a person, Agnani, who has become a Gunateetha. He questions about the nature of an individual having transcended the gunas. When they are beyond these gunas, they become completely liberated from the sorrows and weaknesses pertaining to the world of time and space. They reach timeless bliss absolute. At this point, Arjuna asks these three questions. Prabho etan gunan atitaha kairlingaihi bhavati. Kairlingaihi means indicators. What are the characteristics or the indicators of a person who has transcended these three gunas? In the second chapter, Arjuna asks the same question. Sita pragnasya ka bhasha. Arjuna wants to know, will there be any change in his physical body, or will he acquire any siddhis? How to recognize him? With what indicators does he exist? The second question he asks is, Kim acharaha? Acharaha means conduct. How does he conduct himself? How does he interact with the people? Because Agnani also lives in the same society. Will there be any change in his language? What will be his lifestyle? How will he react to the world outside? Arjuna asks the third question. Katam chaitan trin gunan ativartate. How does he transcend the three gunas? Is it a physical journey? How can we go beyond these three gunas when we are suffering from the past vasanas? Krishna gives the answers in the following verses. Hari Om. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Lakshmi, for a nice explanation of a very important question of Arjuna, which brings us back to our thoughts of Astita Prajna days in the second chapter. Having come to know about Gunatraya and also knowing about Gunateetha and the tremendous benefits that we can have, a very relevant question is, what are the qualities of such a person? Does such a person is able to relate in this world? Is it something practically possible? Let us see how Shri Krishna answers this question, and Ullas will answer that for us. Ullas, please.
Thank you, sir. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. So in the last verse, we saw that Arjuna asks Lord Krishna, what are the characteristics of that Gunateetha? And he's perhaps trying to look at, maybe there is some changes in physical body or different things, but mainly Krishna is going to answer to him that it's just a mindset change. As Swamiji always says that it's all about the attitude. It's all about how we look at the world. That's what changes once we progress on the spiritual path. So Krishna is going to answer in the three different questions. 22 and 23 will be, how does Gunateetha look like? What is his behavior in the next two verses? And in the last, he is going to tell the sadhana, how the sadhana that you have to do to become a Gunateetha. Now, Gunateetha means one who is Atita, who is beyond all the gunas. Gunas are Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Now, how to become somebody who is beyond all three of them? The next slide, we see that the first thing, as Sir has also just now told, that the qualification or the identification of a Gunateetha is that he has detached himself from his body mind. He's somebody who's looking at it from a very objective perspective, that okay, these are things that I use. For example, I use this mouse, but I am not this mouse. It is something else. So all the problems that are there with the body and mind, they are not my problem. Of course, like if something happens to my car, I understand, okay, I have to get it fixed and all. So it's not that you just let it be, but I don't get too much worried or anxious about it because I am looking at it from a detached perspective. It is not entirely me. I'm not identified completely with it. It is something as a tool that I use. In the next slide, we see that with this, a Gunateetha actually would have gone through various stages to reach there. What all he would have already done, he would have done a good karma yoga. He would have done a lot of upasana yoga to actually clarify his mind, to concentrate his mind. Now he has a very strong mind and very strong body. So he can actually do a lot of things. He can be very dynamic in nature. But he'll be predominantly sattvika in mind. In the next slide, we see that with all these things, he has developed a very, very strong mind. What does a strong mind mean? That whatever happens around him, he's not very much bothered about it. Doesn't get very, anxious about that. And how is that possible? Because he's all the time aware of the mental condition. We already saw he knows that, okay, this mind and body is not me. So he's able to look at it from a detached perspective. Okay, what all is going on in my mind? Okay, these thoughts are coming. All right. So I am sad right now, or I'm happy. So my mind is sad or my mind is happy. So he's able to detach that way. But again, even for a Gunateetha, it is not that everything becomes 100% secure. Sometimes certain thoughts, certain things will still come to him also, her also. And in those specific scenarios, there also he gives a very balanced response. It is not that he becomes very apathetic, that he's very indifferent about the whole situation, or he becomes very overreactive. There also, instead of a reaction, he would give a response. So he's very balanced in that approach, because all the time his attention is on improving the state of the mind. He already knows that whatever happens, I'm already Purna. Nothing impacts there. What I'm trying to do with these actions and all is improve the condition of my mind, make it even stronger than what it already is. In the next slide, now let's look at the verse exactly, how Krishna answers this. He says, Prakasham cha pravrittim cha mohameva cha pandava. He says in all these three situations, whether it is Prakasham representing Sattva, Pravrittim representing action, that is Rajas, or Moham, that is delusion or Tamas. In either of these three conditions, whatever happens, Nadveshti, he doesn't hate if something comes up. sampravrittani. If something arises, let's say if tamas arises after lunch, if he feels sleepy, he's not hating that, oh, why I'm sleeping, I'm not able to do my work. Na nivrittani kankshati. And he's not desiring or craving for something which is gone. For example, in the morning I'm very, very active, I can do a lot of thinking and all, but now the morning hours are going, oh, if there were a few more hours in the morning. He's not craving for that also. He's balanced, he knows what it is. For example, now this is my example, that in a cricket team, there are all three things. There is batting, there is fielding, and there is bowling. Similarly, for us also, there is always sattva, rajas, tamas. Sometimes something is predominant, sometimes something else is predominant. A coach is kind of a Gunateetha. He's beyond the team. He's part of the team, but not really. But he can look at the team from a detached manner. Sometimes batting is going to be predominant. They'll be really doing great batting and may win the match. Sometimes it might be the bowling team, but he has to be aware that where am I strong? If he's not very craving that, oh, always batting has to be strong. Sometimes bowling could be strong. So he's aware, he's detached, and he's saying that how I can make the best play happen. And if we win, that's also great. So he's unattached to any guna. And that is why he's called Gunateetha. He accepts, like a coach would accept that, okay, this is my team. I don't really need to have a Joe Root or a Ben Stokes in an Indian team. This is my team. How can I develop these players? How can I get the best performance out of this team? So similarly, a Gunateetha has all the gunas in his matter, which is body and mind, but he himself considers them as detached from them and goes beyond them and sees how he can perform it. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Vilas. A very clear explanation of how Sri Krishna addresses Arjuna's question about a Gunateetha. That means Yada Drashta Anupashyati. That means all of us who have been ordinary ones and suddenly have realized that I'm not this body-mind complex. I am the Atma, which is beyond all these three gunas. Now, even though this realization has come, I still have the same body with the same problems. I still have the same mind with the same problems. My mind could be predominantly sattva, rajas, or tamas. It is still there. How do I go about my activities? Now there is a certain level of indifference. Indifference in the sense, more of samatvam. That means I am not affected by how my gunas react to, it's like matra sparsha su kaunteya, sita ushna sukadavkadaya, agama pahino anityaha tam stitikshasva bharata. Ullas has given a lot of importance to a strong mind. Suddenly realize that my mind does not get so affected, although I am the same as far as the body, the same as far as my mind. But now I have a certain amount of titiksha. I do not get too affected when things are not to my liking. I do not get too involved. I have a level of samatvam. This will be described in the next few classes as Sri Krishna comes to the Sthita Prajna portion of the 14th chapter, which we will see in our subsequent classes. We will have a chanting of these verses that we studied today by Aruni Shankar. Over to you, Aruni.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Urdhvam Gachanti Sattvasthaha Madhye Tishtanti Rajasaha Jaghanya Gunavrittisthaha Adho Gachanti Tamasaha Nanyam Gunebhyak Kartaram Yada Drishtanupashyati Gunebhyascha Param Veti Madbhavam Sodhigacchati Gunaneetha Tyatrin Dehi Deha Samudbhavan Janma Mrityu Jara Dukkaihi विमुक्तो मृतमश्नुते अर्जुन उवाच कैर्लिङ्गैस्त्रीन् गुणानेतान् अतीतो भवति प्रभो किमाचारः कथं चैतान् त्रीन् गुणानतिवर्तते श्रीभगवानुवाच प्रकाशं च प्रवृत्तिं च मोहमेव च पाण्डव न द्वेष्टि सम्प्रवृत्तानि न निवृत्तानि काङ्क्षति हरिः ओम् श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम् तत्सत् धन्यवादः.
We shall be back with the 110th session of Bhagavad Gita verse by verse. But before that, remember to join us at 6:45 p.m. local time on Monday, the 8th, for our next session of Disha, Discovery of Inner Strength and Happiness, the session 21, where Karma Sannyasa Yoga part 2 shall be explained with reference to two texts. First one being the chapter 5 of Bhagavad Gita, Karma Yoga and its Phalam, from verses 7 to 12. From Tattva Bodha, the 10 commandments, Yama, Niyama, and 5 to avoid and 5 to follow shall be explained. Our hearty thanks to our respected Dr. Thimma Pegde sir and all the teachers of Param Vedanta for your excellent presentations with painstakingly prepared illustrative slides. Thanks to our sweet young little Aruni for your wonderful and flawless chanting of the day's verses. Most importantly, thank you participants for joining us in today's study. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. For you.
No problem.